After her dad, who was a secret trillionaire, died, her husband divorced his crippled wife to marry her best friend, unaware of her $1 trillion inheritance. But what she did when his mother begged would shock him in ways no amount of money could prepare him for. The wheelchair-bound woman sat in the sterile conference room of Harrison and Associates, her trembling hands gripping legal documents that revealed her father's hidden empire, an empire built across 5 continents that nobody, not her husband of 7 years, not her childhood best friend, not even her late mother, had known existed. The divorce papers her husband had served her 3 days after her father's funeral were still crisp in her purse, the ink barely dry on documents that dissolved their marriage so he could wed the woman who had held her hand through chemotherapy, through surgeries, through every agonizing moment when the car accident had stolen her ability to walk. The attorney's words echoed in her consciousness as he explained the staggering sum, not millions, not hundreds of millions, but a fortune so vast it could fund small nations, while somewhere across town her ex-husband was planning his engagement party, completely oblivious that the woman he'd abandoned for being a burden now controlled more wealth than he could fathom in 10 lifetimes. 6 months would pass before his mother would arrive at the marble steps of the mansion her daughter-in-law now owned, tears streaming down her weathered face as she clutched photos of grandchildren she'd never meet, begging for a mercy she had never shown. But would the crippled heiress extend forgiveness to the family that had discarded her like yesterday's newspaper, or would her response reveal a side of her that nobody had seen coming? The fluorescent lights of Roosevelt Memorial Hospital had hummed their cold symphony for 72 hours straight, but Olivia Matthews had stopped counting the minutes somewhere between her father's final labored breath and the moment the heart monitor flatlined into that terrible, endless tone. Her fingers, still strong despite the paralysis that claimed her legs, had gripped Richard Matthews' weathered hand until the warmth left it completely, until the nurses gently pried her away with practiced sympathy in their eyes. Her husband, Derek Collins, had stood by the door during those final moments, his phone screen illuminating his face in the dim room, his attention clearly divided between the dying man before him and whatever messages demanded his focus. Olivia had noticed but said nothing, her grief too raw and overwhelming to process the smaller betrayals happening in real time. The funeral 3 days later was a modest affair at Greenwood Cemetery, attended by perhaps 40 people who had known Richard Matthews as a quiet accountant who lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, drove a 15-year-old sedan, and never spoke about his past. The rain fell in sheets as the casket lowered into the earth, and Olivia sat in her wheelchair, beneath a black umbrella held by Jennifer Morrison, her best friend since elementary school, the woman who had brought her soup when she was sick and helped her relearn basic tasks after the accident 2 years ago that had changed everything. Derek stood apart from them, his expensive suit somehow looking wrong in the gray afternoon light, his eyes flickering to his watch with increasing frequency. What Olivia couldn't have known, what nobody attending that funeral could have possibly suspected, was that Richard Matthews had lived a double life so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that even the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit would later marvel at its complexity. The modest accountant facade had been exactly that, a facade hiding a financial empire that spanned manufacturing plants in Southeast Asia, pharmaceutical patents worth billions, commercial real estate holdings in every major city across North America, and technology investments that had multiplied exponentially over 3 decades. The secret had died with him, but the wealth had not. That evening, as mourners dispersed and Olivia returned to the small apartment she shared with Derek, she found him packing a suitcase. The bedroom they'd shared for 7 years suddenly felt like foreign territory as she wheeled herself through the doorway, her heart beginning to race with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. "We need to talk," Derek said without looking at her, his voice carrying that careful flatness that people use when they've rehearsed difficult conversations in their minds until the words lose all genuine emotion. Olivia's hands gripped the wheels of her chair, her knuckles whitening as something ancient and instinctive whispered warnings her conscious mind wasn't ready to hear. "I've been thinking about this for months," Derek continued, folding a shirt with mechanical precision, still refusing to meet her eyes. "This isn't working anymore. I'm 34 years old, Olivia. I can't spend the rest of my life as a caretaker. I need a partner, not a patient." The words landed like physical blows, each syllable a small violence. "I've filed for divorce," he said, finally turning to face her, his expression carved from stone. "The papers are on the kitchen table. I've already signed them. I'm moving out tonight." Olivia's voice, when it came, sounded small and distant even to her own ears. "There's someone else?" It wasn't a question, but Derek answered anyway. And the truth was somehow worse than any scenario her imagination had constructed during sleepless nights, when she'd sensed his growing distance. "Jennifer and I have been seeing each other for 6 months, he said, and the casualness with which he destroyed 2 relationships simultaneously would have been impressive if it weren't so devastating. "She understands what I need. She can give me the life I want, the active life, the normal life. We're getting married next month." Jennifer. Her Jennifer. The woman who had braided her hair in 3rd grade, who had been her maid of honor, who had cried with her in the hospital after the accident, promising that nothing would change, that they'd face everything together. That Jennifer. Olivia sat frozen in her wheelchair as Derek finished packing, as he walked out of their apartment carrying 2 suitcases and 7 years of shared history, as the door clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the sudden silence. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears would come later, in the dark hours before dawn, when the full weight of her isolation crashed over her like a tidal wave. But in that moment she simply sat in the lengthening shadows, wondering how she had failed to see the betrayal blooming right in front of her. The envelope from Harrison and Associates arrived 4 days later, delivered by courier to the apartment that now felt too large and too empty, despite being exactly the same size it had always been. Olivia almost didn't open it, assuming it was another legal document related to her father's modest estate, another administrative detail to be handled in the aftermath of death. But something about the weight of the envelope, the quality of the paper, suggested this was different. Inside, a simple letter requested her presence at their downtown offices for a matter of significant importance regarding the estate of Richard James Matthews. The appointment was scheduled for 2 days later at 10 a.m., and a phone number was provided should she need to reschedule. Olivia called a medical transport service to take her to the address, a gleaming high-rise in the financial district that seemed at odds with her father's humble lifestyle. But she went anyway, curious despite herself. The law offices of Harrison and Associates occupied the entire 32nd floor, all marble surfaces and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic views of the city skyline. A receptionist with a kind smile escorted Olivia to a conference room where 3 attorneys waited, along with a man who introduced himself as Charles Wu, executor of her father's estate. "Ms. Matthews," Charles began, his voice gentle but professional. "What I'm about to tell you will likely come as a shock, but I want to assure you that everything has been verified, notarized, and is completely legal and legitimate." He slid a folder across the polished table toward her, but the papers inside might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the sense they initially made. Numbers. So many numbers. Commas and zeros stretching across pages in configurations that Olivia's brain struggled to process. "Your father," Charles continued, "was not an accountant in the traditional sense you understood. He was, in fact, one of the most successful private investors and entrepreneurs of his generation, operating under various corporate structures and shell companies to maintain his privacy, His net worth at the time of his death was approximately $1.2 trillion. The room tilted slightly, or perhaps that was just Olivia's perception of reality fundamentally shifting. "Trillion," she whispered, testing the word on her tongue. "That's not... People don't have $1 trillion. "Very few do," Charles agreed. "Your father was exceptionally private about his wealth, according to the letters he left for you, and yes, there are several. He wanted to live a normal life, to raise you without the complications that extreme wealth brings. He wanted you to develop your own character, your own values, without the corrupting influence of knowing you'd never have to work, never have to struggle, never have to learn empathy through genuine hardship." One of the attorneys opened another folder, revealing photographs. Her father shaking hands with world leaders, cutting ribbons at factory openings, sitting at boardroom tables surrounded by executives in cities Olivia had only seen in movies. A stranger's life. A stranger who had made her peanut butter sandwiches and helped with homework and taught her to ride a bike. "The entirety of his estate passes to you," Charles continued. "There are no other beneficiaries. You are now effectively one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. The transition of assets will take some time to complete, but I can arrange for immediate liquidity of several $100 million if you require funds while the larger estate settles." Olivia's mind went immediately to Derek, to the divorce papers she'd signed in numb shock 3 days ago, papers that were being processed by the court even now, but which hadn't yet been finalized. She thought of Jennifer, probably selecting wedding invitations at this very moment, imagining a future built on the rubble of destroyed trust. Neither of them knew. Neither of them had any idea. "How long," Olivia asked, her voice steadier than she felt, "before the divorce is final?" Charles consulted his notes. "Based on the filing date and the standard processing time in this jurisdiction, approximately 3 weeks. And they can't contest it? Can't claim any portion of this inheritance? Your father's wealth was entirely separate from any marital assets," one of the attorneys interjected. "Your husband has no legal claim to this inheritance whatsoever, particularly given the timing. The divorce was initiated before you had knowledge of the estate's value, which protects you from any claims of concealment. Additionally, your father's will includes specific language protecting his assets from any claims by spouses or former spouses of his heirs. Richard Matthews, it seemed, had thought of everything, had built protections around his daughter even from beyond the grave, though he couldn't have known specifically that she would need them. Over the following weeks, Olivia's life transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible from the perspective of the woman who'd sat in that hospital room watching her father die. She moved from the cramped apartment to a penthouse overlooking Central Park, purchased outright for $45 million without blinking. She hired a team of physical therapists who worked with her 6 hours a day, exploring every possible avenue for improving her mobility and independence. She established a foundation in her father's name, dedicating $1 billion to spinal injury research and accessibility infrastructure. But she did it quietly, through lawyers and intermediaries, maintaining the privacy her father had valued. Most importantly, she said nothing to Derek or Jennifer about her changed circumstances. The silence was strategic, deliberate, and deeply satisfying in ways that surprised her. She watched from a distance as they announced their engagement on social media, as Jennifer posted photos of her ring with captions about finding true love and second chances. She observed as Derek changed his relationship status and wrote saccharine posts about meeting his soulmate. The temptation to reveal the truth was overwhelming at times, but Olivia resisted, understanding that timing would be everything, that the sweetness of eventual revelation would be directly proportional to how long she waited. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October, processed through the court system with bureaucratic efficiency. Derek received nothing because there was nothing to receive. or so he believed. The modest apartment was sold, the furniture divided, the bank account that had held perhaps $8,000 split down the middle. He signed the papers without hesitation, clearly eager to close this chapter of his life and begin the new one with Jennifer. Olivia received her copy of the final decree while sitting in her penthouse, a glass of wine in her hand, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. She should have felt sad, she supposed, but instead felt only a strange sense of liberation, of a weight lifting that she hadn't fully recognized she was carrying. Derek and Jennifer married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at a boutique venue in the wine country, the kind of tasteful affair that cost perhaps $30,000 and felt lavish to people who didn't understand what true wealth could buy. Olivia knew this because Jennifer's mother, who apparently felt no shame about her daughter's role in destroying a 7-year marriage, posted photos on Facebook with hashtags about love and destiny. The irony was almost too perfect. For 6 months, Olivia lived her new life in quiet contentment, building a routine that included her therapy sessions, her foundation work, and occasionally venturing out to art galleries and restaurants using the freedom that unlimited resources provided. She commissioned modifications to a luxury vehicle that made it fully accessible, hired a driver who treated her chair with the respect it deserved rather than the pity she'd grown accustomed to, and slowly began to rediscover who she was beyond the labels of invalid or victim or abandoned wife. She was having lunch at an upscale bistro in Tribeca on a mild April afternoon when she saw Derek for the first time since the divorce was finalized. He was with Jennifer, and even from across the restaurant, Olivia could see the tension in their body language, the way Jennifer's smile seemed forced, the way Derek's eyes kept darting to his phone with that same distracted energy she remembered from their marriage. They didn't notice her. Why would they? She was just another woman in a wheelchair, easily overlooked in the invisible way that disabled people often are, rendered functionally invisible by society's discomfort with physical difference. But Olivia noticed everything. The way Jennifer's designer handbag was a knockoff, the way Derek's suit was showing wear at the cuffs, the way they both looked somehow diminished, as though the life they'd built on betrayal had extracted a price they hadn't anticipated paying. She felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just a distant clinical observation of two people who had made choices and were living with the consequences. The knock on her penthouse door came on a Saturday morning in late April, unexpected and jarring in the quiet of her routine. Olivia checked the security camera feed, her heart rate accelerating when she recognized the woman standing in the hallway, clutching a worn purse and looking somehow smaller than Olivia remembered. Patricia Collins, Derek's mother. Olivia buzzed her up without speaking, curiosity overriding caution. Patricia had aged in the 6 months since Olivia had last seen her, new lines carved around her eyes and mouth, her hair grayer, her shoulders rounded with a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. She stepped into the penthouse and stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in the soaring ceilings, the original artwork on the walls, the view that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. "Olivia," she began, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't know where else to go." They sat in the living room, Patricia perched nervously on the edge of a sofa that had cost more than her car, while Olivia positioned her wheelchair across from her, waiting with the patience that wealth and power had taught her. "Derek is in trouble," Patricia said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He lost his job 3 months ago. He was fired for an incident with a coworker. Sexual harassment allegations. It's all over his industry. No one will hire him." Olivia's expression remained neutral, but internally she noted the information with clinical precision. "Jennifer left him 2 weeks ago," Patricia continued, tears beginning to track down her weathered cheeks. "She said she couldn't handle being married to a failure. She took half of everything they had, which wasn't much to begin with, and moved back in with her parents. The symmetry was almost poetic. "He's living with me now," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "In my 2-bedroom apartment. He's depressed, barely eating. He talks about you sometimes, about how he made a mistake, how he threw away something real for something shiny and new." "And you're here because?" Olivia prompted, her tone carefully neutral. Patricia pulled photographs from her purse, spreading them on the coffee table between them. Pictures of Derek as a child, as a teenager, at his college graduation. Pictures of Olivia and Derek on their wedding day, both of them young and hopeful, and completely unprepared for what life would bring. "I'm here to beg," Patricia said simply, her dignity crumbling. "I know I have no right. I know that I stood by while my son abandoned you when you needed him most. I know that I said terrible things about you being a burden, that I encouraged him to leave, that I told him he deserved better than being tied to a wheelchair for the rest of his life." Each confession was a small knife, quick and sharp. "But he's my son," Patricia continued, the tears flowing freely now. "And he's broken, and I hoped that maybe you would be willing to help him, maybe give him a loan to get back on his feet, or use your connections to help him find work. I know you have money now, the penthouse, the car service, the way you look. Something changed after your father died." There it was. The ask, the presumption that because Olivia had been kind once, had been forgiving once, had loved Derek once, that she would be those things again. Olivia let the silence stretch, watching Patricia shift uncomfortably, watching hope and desperation war across her features. "You're right," Olivia said finally. "Something did change after my father died. I inherited his estate, all of it, every single dollar of his $1.2 trillion fortune." Patricia's face went blank, her brain visibly struggling to process the number. "Trillion," Olivia repeated, with a T. "I am one of the wealthiest people on earth, Patricia. I could buy Derek's entire industry without noticing the expense. I could make him successful beyond his wildest dreams with a single phone call. I could solve every problem he has and 1,000 more he hasn't even imagined yet." Hope bloomed in Patricia's eyes, bright and desperate and doomed. "But I won't," Olivia continued, her voice calm and implacable. "Not a single penny, not now, not ever." "But your son divorced me 3 days after my father's funeral," Olivia said, each word measured and deliberate. 3 days. While I was grieving the loss of the only family I had left, while I was trying to process my father's death, he was planning his exit strategy. He served me divorce papers because I was a burden, because my disability made me less than human in his eyes, less deserving of love and partnership. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Olivia raised a hand, silencing her. "Jennifer, my best friend since childhood, the woman I trusted with my deepest secrets and darkest fears, was sleeping with my husband for months before he left. They built their relationship on lies and betrayal, while pretending to care about me, while holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. They made a mistake," Patricia tried. "They made a choice," Olivia corrected sharply. "They chose to value convenience and physical ability over loyalty and love. They chose to abandon me when I was most vulnerable, when I needed support more than I ever had in my life. Those weren't mistakes, Patricia. Those were deliberate, calculated decisions that revealed exactly who they are as people." The older woman was crying openly now, but Olivia felt no sympathy, only a cool clarity that came from having months to process her pain, to transform her grief into something harder and more durable. "And you," Olivia continued, her gaze sharp and unwavering, "you encouraged him every step of the way. You told him he deserved better than a crippled wife. You said I was dragging him down, limiting his potential, trapping him in a life of servitude. Don't think I didn't hear those conversations, Patricia. Don't think I don't remember every single word you said when you thought I couldn't hear. "I was wrong," Patricia whispered. "I was so wrong. I'm sorry." "I'm sure you are," Olivia said. "Sorry that your son's choices led to consequences. Sorry that Jennifer turned out to be exactly as shallow as she showed herself to be. Sorry that Derek is now experiencing a fraction of the isolation and rejection that I felt when he abandoned me. But you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry that it didn't work out the way you planned." Olivia wheeled closer, her eyes locked on Patricia's tear-stained face. "Here's what's going to happen," she said quietly. "You're going to leave my home and never contact me again. You're going to tell Derek exactly what I said here today, every word. You're going to let him know that I'm aware of his circumstances, that I have the power to change them with a snap of my fingers, and that I'm choosing not to because he earned this outcome through his own actions." "Please, no," Olivia said firmly. "No please, no bargaining, no second chances. Derek taught me that when people become inconvenient, when they require more effort than they're worth, you cut them loose without looking back. I'm simply applying the lesson he taught me." But even as she spoke these words, even as she watched Patricia crumble under the weight of rejection, Olivia felt something shift inside her, some final piece of healing clicking into place. The anger she'd carried for months, the hurt that had burrowed deep into her bones, was finally beginning to release its grip. Not because Derek or Jennifer or Patricia deserved her forgiveness, but because she deserved her own peace. "However," Olivia said, and saw hope flicker again in Patricia's eyes, desperate and pathetic, "I'm not the person your son believed me to be. I'm not cruel despite having every reason to be. I'm not vindictive, though I have the resources to destroy his life as thoroughly as he tried to destroy mine." She wheeled to her desk, withdrew a business card, and handed it to Patricia. "This is the contact information for my foundation's employment program. We help people who've made mistakes rebuild their professional lives. If Derek genuinely wants to change, if he's willing to undergo counseling, to take accountability for his actions, to demonstrate real growth and understanding of why his behavior was unacceptable, then he can apply through the proper channels like anyone else." Patricia stared at the card as though it might disappear. "I'm not promising anything," Olivia clarified. "He'll go through the same vetting process as every other applicant. He'll have to prove he's worth the investment. And if he gets in, he'll work for every single opportunity the program provides, without special treatment, without shortcuts, without any acknowledgement of his connection to me." "I thank you," Patricia whispered. "Don't thank me," Olivia said. "I'm not doing this for Derek or for you. I'm doing this because my father spent his life believing that people deserve second chances if they're willing to earn them, and because I want to honor his memory by being the person he raised me to be, not the person Derek's betrayal almost turned me into." Patricia left shortly after, clutching the business card like a lifeline, and Olivia sat alone in her penthouse as the afternoon sun painted the city in shades of amber and gold. She thought about her father, about the empire he'd built in silence, about the lessons he'd taught her about dignity and strength and the difference between justice and revenge. She thought about Derek probably sitting in his mother's apartment at this very moment, waiting to hear whether his ex-wife, the woman he'd discarded like trash, would save him from the consequences of his own choices. And she thought about herself, about the journey from that hospital room where everything fell apart to this moment of power and clarity, about how suffering had revealed depths of resilience she hadn't known she possessed. 3 months later, Derek's application to the Foundation's employment program was denied. The review committee, who had no idea of his connection to Olivia, cited concerns about his failure to take genuine accountability for his past actions, noting that his essays and interviews showed more self-pity than self-awareness, more excuses than understanding. Olivia read the rejection letter without emotion, then filed it away and returned to her work. She had a foundation to run, research to fund, lives to change in ways that mattered. She had physical therapy sessions that were slowly, incrementally expanding her mobility, and a team of doctors exploring experimental treatments that might one day give her back what the accident had taken. She had a future that was hers alone to define, built not on the validation of others but on the solid foundation of her own worth and her father's incredible legacy. And that, she realized as she looked out over the city that was now hers, in ways Derek would never comprehend, was more than enough. The story of Olivia Matthews didn't end with revenge or reconciliation, didn't conclude with dramatic confrontations or tearful reunions. It simply continued day by day as she built a life that honored both the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. Wealthier than most people could imagine, but more importantly, richer in the ways that actually mattered. And somewhere across the city, in a cramped apartment that smelled of failure and regret, Derek Collins learned the hardest lesson of his life: that some doors, once closed, remain locked forever, and that the price of cruelty is often paid in currencies that money can never purchase: loneliness, regret, and the permanent knowledge of what might have been if only he'd chosen differently when it mattered most. The inheritance we choose. 5 years after Patricia Collins walked out of that penthouse carrying a business card and a lesson in consequences, Olivia Matthews sat in a different conference room, this one at the headquarters of the Matthews Foundation for Accessibility and Human Dignity, a gleaming building in Lower Manhattan that she'd designed from the ground up with universal accessibility as its core principle. The foundation had grown beyond even her ambitious initial vision. What had started as a billion-dollar commitment to spinal injury research had evolved into a comprehensive organization that addressed the systemic barriers facing people with disabilities across every sector of society. But today's meeting was special, focused on reviewing the 5-year outcomes of their flagship program, the Second Chances Initiative. We've served 3,147 individuals through the program, reported Dr. Amanda Chen, the Foundation's program director, pulling up data on the screen. The retention rate is 73%, significantly higher than industry standards. Of those who completed the full program, 89% are still employed 2 years later, and average income has increased by 340%. Olivia scanned the statistics with satisfaction, but what caught her attention was the narrative summary section, the stories behind the numbers. There was Marcus, a former Wall Street trader who'd lost everything to addiction and had rebuilt his life as a financial literacy educator for underserved communities. There was Sarah, a teacher who'd been fired for whistleblowing on administrative corruption and now ran anti-retaliation training for school districts nationwide. There was James, convicted of white-collar crime at 25, who'd served his time and now headed the Foundation's Criminal Justice Reform Initiative. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads: genuine accountability, demonstrated growth, and commitment to using their second chances, not just to rebuild their own lives, but to help others avoid their mistakes. "What about the rejections?" Olivia asked. "What have we learned from those who didn't make it through the program?" Dr. Chen pulled up another data set. The primary predictor of failure isn't the severity of the original mistake, it's the individual's locus of control. Those who blame external circumstances, who see themselves primarily as victims, who haven't internalized their role in creating their situations, they almost universally fail to complete the program or succeed in placement. Olivia thought about Derek, about his rejection letter, about the reports she'd received through appropriate channels that he'd tried to reapply twice more, each application showing the same patterns of externalization and self-pity. The committee had rejected him each time, and Olivia had never intervened, trusting the process she'd created to function without her personal influence. "The data suggests something important," Dr. Chen continued. Redemption isn't something we can give people. It's something they have to choose for themselves, and that choice requires a level of brutal honesty that many people never achieve. The power of boundaries. After the meeting, Olivia reviewed a case that had been flagged for her attention, not because it required her decision, but because the program coordinators thought she'd find it instructive. A woman named Rebecca had applied to the program after her husband divorced her. She'd been caught having an affair with her best friend's husband, and the resulting scandal had cost her both her marriage and her career in a small, tight-knit industry. Her application essay was remarkable in its honesty. "I destroyed 2 families because I was selfish and cowardly," Rebecca had written. "I told myself stories about true love and destiny to justify betraying people who trusted me. I blamed my marriage, blamed my ex-husband's work schedule, blamed everything except my own choices. It took losing everything, my marriage, my children's respect, my career, my reputation, to finally look in the mirror and see who I'd become." The essay continued for several pages, detailing not just what she'd done but why, examining the thought patterns and justifications that had allowed her to betray her values. She didn't ask for sympathy or make excuses. She simply laid out the truth and explained what she'd learned from the ruins of her life. The committee had accepted her into the program. Reading Rebecca's journey, Olivia reflected on something she'd learned in her own healing. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. When she'd refused to help Derek, when she'd closed the door on Patricia's pleas, she hadn't been acting from cruelty but from self-preservation and wisdom. Some people mistake kindness for an obligation to absorb abuse, to set themselves on fire to keep others warm. But true kindness, Olivia had learned, requires the discernment to know when helping someone actually enables their dysfunction, when forgiveness without accountability becomes complicity in ongoing harm. Derek hadn't needed her rescue. He'd needed to face the full consequences of his choices long enough to decide whether he wanted to change. So far, he'd chosen comfort over growth, chosen blame over accountability, and those were his decisions to make, but they didn't obligate her to cushion the impact. The disability paradox. One of the Foundation's most successful initiatives had become the Disability Leadership Institute, a program that trained people with disabilities for executive and leadership positions across industries. The resistance Olivia had encountered when launching this program had been illuminating. "But won't it be harder for them?" one well-meaning board member had asked. "Don't we need to focus on helping them find appropriate work?" The condescension was so ingrained, the speaker didn't even recognize it. Olivia had learned something profound through her own experience. Disability reveals society's limitations more than individual limitations. The world wasn't inaccessible because wheelchairs couldn't navigate it. The world was inaccessible because it had been designed without considering wheelchairs. The problem wasn't the disability. The problem was the assumptions about disability. She'd poured resources into changing those assumptions, funding adaptive technology research, creating architectural accessibility standards that went beyond legal minimums, and, most importantly, putting people with disabilities in positions of power and visibility where they could change the narrative themselves. The Disability Leadership Institute graduates were now CEOs, politicians, university presidents, and cultural influencers. They were changing industries from the inside, proving that limitation was often a failure of imagination rather than capability. Olivia herself had become something of an icon, though she'd resisted that role initially. She appeared on magazine covers, gave keynote speeches, and used her platform deliberately to challenge assumptions. But she also made sure never to be defined solely by her disability or her wealth. She was a complex person with interests ranging from modern art to quantum physics, from urban planning to culinary innovation. The wealth question. The most common question Olivia received in interviews was some variation of, "What's it like to have unlimited resources?" Her answer had evolved over the years into something more nuanced than people expected. Wealth solves certain problems, she'd say, but it creates others, and it reveals truths about human nature that can be uncomfortable to acknowledge. The truth she'd discovered was that money amplifies who you already are. It doesn't make cruel people kind or selfish people generous. It just gives them more resources to express their existing nature. She'd seen it in herself, in the moments when she'd been tempted to use her wealth as a weapon against Derek and Jennifer, when revenge had whispered seductively about the damage she could do. But her father had taught her through his choices and his letters that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, it was about impact. He'd lived modestly not because he was cheap, but because he'd understood that money's value came from what it enabled you to build, create, and give, not from what it allowed you to consume. Olivia had created a personal spending rule. For every dollar she spent on herself, she committed $10 to the foundation's work. This kept her grounded, kept her connected to purpose, kept the wealth from becoming an isolating bubble that separated her from human connection and meaning. The Jennifer question. 3 years after everything fell apart, Jennifer Morrison had sent Olivia a letter. Not through lawyers or intermediaries, but a handwritten note delivered by regular mail to the foundation's public address. The letter was 7 pages long, filled with apologies and explanations and pleas for forgiveness. Jennifer had enclosed photos of herself at what appeared to be an AA meeting, certificates from therapy programs, articles she'd written about betrayal and redemption. I've spent every day since then trying to understand how I became someone capable of such profound betrayal, Jennifer wrote. I've been in therapy 4 times a week for 2 years. I've lost friends, family connections, professional opportunities. I've sat with the full weight of what I did to you, to Derek's first marriage, to the person I thought I was. The letter didn't ask for reconciliation, didn't request money or help. It simply offered accountability and apologized without expectation of absolution. Olivia had sat with that letter for weeks, reading and rereading it, trying to discern whether it represented genuine transformation or sophisticated manipulation. She'd ultimately decided something important. It didn't matter whether Jennifer had truly changed or not, whether her remorse was genuine or performed. Olivia's healing didn't depend on understanding Jennifer's journey. She could acknowledge the apology without offering forgiveness, could recognize someone's growth without inviting them back into her life. She'd sent a brief response. I appreciate your honesty and hope you continue your healing journey. I won't be part of that journey, but I wish you well from a distance. No reconciliation, no door left open, but no cruelty either. Just clear boundaries and honest acknowledgement. Some of Olivia's friends had criticized this choice. But she's clearly changed, they'd argued. Doesn't she deserve another chance? This revealed another hard truth Olivia had learned. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and growth doesn't entitle someone to access they've destroyed. Jennifer might indeed have transformed into a better person. That was wonderful for her and for the people in her current life, but it didn't erase the past or obligate Olivia to provide a relationship that no longer served her well-being. Trust, once shattered at that level, couldn't be restored through apologies and time. Some breaks were permanent, and accepting that wasn't hardness. It was wisdom. The Derek aftermath. Through channels she wasn't proud of but also didn't regret, Olivia had kept loose tabs on Derek's trajectory, not obsessively, not vindictively, but with the clinical interest of someone studying the long-term consequences of choices. He'd eventually found work in a different industry, at a significantly lower level than where he'd been. He'd moved to a different city, apparently trying to escape his reputation. He'd entered therapy after his 3rd rejection from the foundation, finally beginning the accountability work that might eventually lead to genuine transformation. He'd also started a blog about his experience, The Man Who Threw Away Everything, where he documented his journey with increasing honesty. The early posts had been full of self-pity and externalization, but the recent ones showed glimpses of real understanding. "I've spent years blaming Olivia's disability for my unhappiness," one recent post read. "But the truth is I was unhappy with myself, and I used her condition as an excuse to avoid examining my own character. I told myself I was trapped, that I was sacrificing my happiness, that I deserved better. I never once asked whether she deserved better than a husband who saw her as a burden rather than a partner." Olivia had read that post 3 times, searching for the manipulation she'd become adept at detecting. But it seemed genuine, written with the kind of painful self-awareness that couldn't be faked indefinitely. It didn't change her boundaries, it didn't make her want to reach out, but it did give her something unexpected. Hope that people could change if they genuinely wanted to, even if that change came too late to repair what they'd broken. The lessons for everyone on the 5th anniversary of her father's death. Olivia gave a speech at a major conference on disability rights and social justice, but she didn't talk about accessibility standards or legal frameworks. Instead, she talked about the human lessons her journey had taught her, lessons that applied far beyond her specific circumstances. The first lesson, she told the audience of thousands, is that crisis reveals character, it doesn't create it. When my husband left me 3 days after my father died, he wasn't becoming someone new. He was revealing who he'd always been under the surface. The stress of my disability and my grief simply removed the social constraints that had hidden his true nature. She paused, letting the words sink in. This means 2 things. First, pay attention to how people treat you when you're vulnerable, when you're struggling, when you can't offer them anything in return. That's who they really are. Second, understand that who you are in crisis is who you've been building yourself to be all along through small choices and daily habits. You don't suddenly become brave or kind or resilient in hard times. You reveal the bravery, kindness, and resilience you've been cultivating all along. The second lesson she shared was equally important. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. I've forgiven my ex-husband and my former best friend in the sense that I no longer carry active anger toward them, that I don't wish them harm, that I've released the emotional poison of sustained bitterness. But forgiveness doesn't mean I trust them again, doesn't mean I want them in my life, doesn't mean I pretend the betrayal didn't happen. She explained further. Our culture often conflates forgiveness with reconciliation, which creates enormous pressure on people who've been harmed to restore relationships with people who've hurt them. But these are separate processes. You can forgive someone for your own peace while maintaining boundaries for your own protection. In fact, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to let them experience the full consequences of their actions without rescuing them from the lessons they need to learn. The third lesson was perhaps the most nuanced. Some people need to lose everything before they can find themselves. My ex-husband's loss of his job, his marriage to my former friend, his reputation, these weren't punishments I inflicted. They were consequences he earned. And uncomfortable as it is to acknowledge, those consequences may have been exactly what he needed to begin genuine self-examination. Olivia shared how Derek's journey, from what she'd observed at a distance, suggested that sometimes the kindest long-term action is to let people face the full weight of their choices rather than cushioning the impact and enabling continued dysfunction. This doesn't mean we shouldn't help people, she clarified. It means we need wisdom to discern the difference between help that empowers growth and help that enables stagnation, between compassion that promotes healing and compassion that prevents accountability. The money lesson, but perhaps the most important lesson Olivia shared was about wealth itself, because her story had fascinated people largely because of the dramatic financial reversal. Money, she told the audience, is a magnifier, not a transformer. It doesn't make you generous if you're selfish, doesn't make you wise if you're foolish, doesn't make you happy if you're discontent with who you are. What it does is remove constraints, which means you become more purely yourself, for better or worse. She explained how inheriting her father's fortune had revealed something important. Derek and Jennifer hadn't left her because she was poor. They'd left because she was disabled. The money she later inherited wouldn't have changed their decision because their betrayal was about character, not economics. If anything, Olivia said, suddenly having unlimited resources made their betrayal a gift in disguise because it showed me exactly who they were before I invested more years in relationships built on conditional acceptance. They left when I was vulnerable, proving they'd never loved me fully, and then I discovered I had the resources to build an entirely new life without them. The timing was devastatingly painful, but ultimately perfect. She shared her personal philosophy about wealth. Money's value is measured by what it enables you to create, not what it allows you to consume. My father built a $1 trillion fortune, but lived in a modest house and drove an old car because he understood this instinctively. He was rich in the ways that mattered, rich in purpose, rich in impact, rich in the knowledge that his wealth was a tool for positive change, not a scoreboard or a means of status. The disability wisdom. Finally, Olivia addressed the elephant in every room she entered, her wheelchair, her disability, the visible marker that had defined how people saw her, both before and after her wealth became known. Here's what I've learned about disability, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference hall. It's simultaneously the least important and most important thing about me. She explained the paradox. It's the least important because it doesn't define my intelligence, my character, my capacity to love and create and contribute. It's a fact about my body, not a fact about my worth or potential. People who reduce me to my disability, who see wheelchair instead of person, are revealing their own limitations, not mine. But it's also the most important thing about me because it's shaped my perspective in ways that inform everything I do. It's taught me about resilience, about systemic barriers, about the gap between how society says it values people and how it actually treats those who don't fit standard molds. It's given me empathy for anyone who's marginalized, overlooked, or underestimated. It's made me who I am. She paused, her next words carefully chosen. The accident that paralyzed me was a tragedy. The husband who abandoned me because of it was a revelation. The inheritance that came afterward was a responsibility. But the person I became through navigating all of it, that's a choice I made every single day. A choice to let hardship refine me rather than define me. The final word. Olivia concluded her speech with a challenge to the audience. Everyone faces betrayal, loss, and unexpected trials. Not everyone inherits a fortune, but everyone inherits something, whether it's trauma or wisdom, bitterness or resilience, cynicism or compassion. The real inheritance isn't what happens to you. It's who you choose to become because of it. My father left me money, yes, but more importantly, he left me an example of using resources, whatever resources you have, to create positive change. My ex-husband left me with trust issues and emotional scars, but also with clarity about my values and boundaries. My disability took away my ability to walk, but gave me insight into human nature and social systems that I might never have developed otherwise. She looked out over the sea of faces, some in wheelchairs like her, some standing, all of them carrying their own invisible struggles and triumphs. The question isn't whether hard things will happen to you. They will. The question is what inheritance you'll create from those experiences. Will you build walls or bridges? Will you hoard resources or invest them? Will you let your wounds fester or transform them into wisdom you can share? My ex-husband made his choice when he walked out. I made mine when I decided not to let his departure define my worth. Both of us are living with the inheritance we created through those choices. Choose wisely, Olivia concluded, because the inheritance you create through your character, your choices, your response to both fortune and hardship is the only one that truly belongs to you, the only one no one can take away, and the only one that will outlast your lifetime. The standing ovation lasted for 7 minutes, but Olivia was already thinking about the Foundation's next project, about the lives that would be changed, about the inheritance she was building one day, one choice, one act of purpose-driven compassion at a time. Because that's what true wealth looks like. Not a number in a bank account, but a life lived with intention, integrity, and impact that ripples far beyond any individual story. And that lesson, perhaps the most valuable inheritance her father had left her, was one she was determined to pass forward to everyone her life and work could touch.